8-year-old girl gives birth to 20 babies. How is this even possible? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Emily McAllister was just 8 years old, living in a quiet countryside town surrounded by fields of wildflowers and rolling hills. Her days were filled with innocent dreams of becoming an artist, playing with her little dog named Scout, and climbing the big oak tree in her backyard. Life was simple, predictable, and carefree as it should be for a child her age. But one fateful morning, Emily woke up to a reality she couldn't comprehend. Her small, cozy bedroom, painted in soft yellows and scattered with her stuffed animals, was no longer quiet. Instead, it was filled with the cries of 20 newborn babies. 20. Emily sat up in her bed, her heart pounding. She rubbed her eyes, convinced it had to be a dream. But no matter how hard she blinked or pinched herself, the babies remained. They were everywhere, on her bed, in the toy chest, on the floor, nestled in piles of her blankets. Each one was impossibly tiny, wrapped in soft white swaddles that seemed to glow faintly in the morning sunlight. "Mom! Dad!" Emily screamed, her voice breaking. She stumbled out of bed, tripping over a teddy bear as she ran to the door. Her parents, Sarah and Greg, rushed in moments later, their faces pale and alarmed. "Emily? What's wrong?" Sarah asked, scanning the room. And then they saw it. The babies. Their cries filled the air, their tiny fists waving as if to demand attention. Sarah gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. Greg stared, his jaw hanging open. What is this?" Greg stammered. "Where did they come from?" "I don't know," Emily cried. "I woke up and they were just here." Sarah slowly approached one of the babies on the floor, her hands trembling as she picked it up. The infant stopped crying and blinked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Greg, they're real," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Greg crouched next to another baby, gently touching its tiny hand. The baby grabbed his finger, gurgling softly. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered. In the chaos, Emily stood frozen, her mind racing. How could this be happening? Where had the babies come from? Why were they in her room? And why did she feel such an overwhelming sense of responsibility for them? Sarah and Greg spent the rest of the morning calling everyone they could think of, the local doctor, the police, even their church pastor. But no one had an explanation. The babies appeared to be healthy, but there was no sign of how they had arrived or who they belonged to. There were no reports of missing children, no mysterious visitors in town, and no logical way 20 infants could have simply appeared overnight. News of the strange occurrence spread quickly through the small town. By afternoon, a crowd had gathered outside the McAllister home, neighbors whispering and pointing as they tried to catch a glimpse of the so-called miracle babies. "It's unnatural," said Mrs. Higgins, the town's resident skeptic. "Something like this doesn't just happen." "Maybe it's a sign from God," countered Mr. Rivera, the pastor. "A blessing?" Emily, overwhelmed by the attention and the noise, stayed inside with the babies. She had lined them up in rows on her bed and floor, carefully tucking blankets around them to keep them warm. Despite the impossibility of the situation, she felt an inexplicable bond with each of them. It was as if they were hers, though she couldn't begin to explain why. "I'll take care of you," she whispered to the nearest baby, a tiny girl with a tuft of dark hair. "I promise." That night, the McAllister family sat around the kitchen table, trying to make sense of their new reality. The babies were finally asleep, their soft breathing filling the house like a lullaby. "We can't keep them," Greg said, his voice heavy. "It's too much. We don't even know where they came from." "But who's going to take them?" Sarah countered. "The authorities don't have any answers. They'll end up in the system." "Mom, Dad," Emily interrupted, her small voice filled with conviction. "I want to take care of them." Greg and Sarah stared at her, stunned. "Emily," Sarah began gently, "you're just a little girl. You can't take care of 20 babies." "I know I'm little," Emily said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But they came to me. They're in my room. Doesn't that mean something?" Greg ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. "This isn't a fairy tale. It's real life. We're not equipped for this. But we can figure it out," Sarah said, surprising herself with her own words. "At least until we know more. We can't just give up on them." Greg looked at his wife, then at Emily, and finally let out a reluctant nod. "All right. For now." Over the next few days, the McAllister family's life was turned upside down. Their quiet home became a bustling nursery, with every available surface covered in makeshift cribs, bottles, and diapers. The local community pitched in, donating supplies and food, though their curiosity often outweighed their generosity. Emily threw herself into caring for the babies with a determination that surprised even her parents. She learned how to mix formula, change diapers, and soothe their cries, all while giving each baby a name. There was Hope, the first baby she had picked up, Max the loudest, and Grace the quietest. By the end of the week, every baby had a name and a distinct personality in Emily's eyes. Despite the challenges, Emily found herself feeling fulfilled. The babies brought a sense of purpose she had never known before. She spent hours talking to them, singing lullabies, and even reading them bedtime stories. She didn't understand why they had come to her, but she was determined to be the best mom she could be. Her parents, meanwhile, struggled with the growing tension in the town. Rumors and suspicions swirled, with some claiming the family was hiding something and others insisting the babies were a divine miracle. The McAllisters found themselves under constant scrutiny, their every move watched and judged. One evening, as Emily was tucking the babies in for the night, she noticed something strange. A soft, golden light seemed to emanate from the babies, faint but unmistakable. She blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her, but the light remained. "Mom? Dad?" she called, her voice filled with urgency. Sarah and Greg rushed in, their faces filled with concern. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Look." Emily pointed to the babies, her voice trembling. "They're glowing." Sarah and Greg stared, their expressions shifting from confusion to awe. The light wasn't bright enough to illuminate the room, but it was there, shimmering softly like the glow of fireflies. "What does it mean?" Emily whispered, her heart pounding. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I think this is just the beginning." Over the following days, the mysterious glow became more pronounced. It wasn't constant, but it appeared whenever the babies were calm, almost as if it were tied to their emotions. The soft, golden light filled Emily's room each evening, creating an ethereal atmosphere that felt both magical and otherworldly. Emily couldn't stop watching them. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring in awe as the glow pulsed gently with the rhythm of the baby's breathing. She felt connected to them in a way she couldn't explain, as though she were meant to protect them. Her parents, however, were growing increasingly concerned. The light was unexplainable, and the constant attention from the town was beginning to wear on them. Strangers came by the house daily, some bringing supplies or offering help, while others simply wanted to gawk at the miracle babies. One morning, a local news reporter showed up at their door. "Mrs. McAllister," the woman began, holding a microphone. "I'm Grace Turner from Channel 8 News. We've heard about the extraordinary situation in your home, and we'd like to do a story on it." Sarah hesitated, unsure how to respond. She didn't trust the media to tell their story fairly, but she also didn't want to alienate the community. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "We're not interested in doing interviews." "Please," the reporter pressed. "This story could bring much-needed support to your family. People across the state, and even the country, would want to help." Greg stepped in, his voice firm. "We appreciate the offer, but this is a private matter. Please respect our privacy." The reporter reluctantly left, but the encounter left the McAllisters on edge. The last thing they wanted was for their family to become a media circus. Meanwhile, Emily remained focused on the babies. She had created a daily routine, dividing her time between feeding, changing, and playing with them. Despite the enormity of the task, she rarely complained. The babies brought her a sense of purpose she had never felt before. But as much as she loved them, Emily couldn't ignore the questions that haunted her. Where had they come from? Why had they appeared in her room? And what did the glowing light mean? One afternoon, while playing with Hope and Max, Emily decided to ask her mom. "Do you think the babies are magic?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Sarah looked up from the laundry she was folding, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know, sweetheart. But there's definitely something special about them. Do you think they came to me for a reason?" Emily pressed. Sarah smiled gently. "Maybe. Or maybe we're just meant to take care of them until we figure out where they belong." Emily nodded, though the answer didn't fully satisfy her. She couldn't shake the feeling that the babies were meant to be in her life, and that she was meant to be in theirs. That night, as Emily tucked the babies in, she whispered a promise to each of them. "I'll take care of you no matter what," she said softly. "I'll always be here for you." As the weeks turned into months, the McAllisters adjusted to their new reality. The babies continued to thrive, each developing unique personalities that made them even more endearing. Hope was adventurous, always reaching for new toys or trying to crawl farther than the others. Max was boisterous and loved to giggle, while Grace was serene and calm, often watching her siblings with a quiet curiosity. The glow also became more pronounced, appearing not just at night but during moments of joy or calm. Emily began to notice patterns. When she sang to the babies, the light grew brighter. When they were upset, it dimmed. It was as if the light responded to their emotions, a reflection of their connection to the world around them. The town's curiosity only grew. Despite the McAllisters' efforts to keep a low profile, rumors spread, and people began to speculate wildly about the babies. Some claimed they were angels sent from heaven. Others suggested they were part of a government experiment or an alien phenomenon. The family did their best to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on caring for the babies and protecting them from the outside world. But not everyone in town was supportive. One evening, as Greg was taking out the trash, he found a note taped to their mailbox. It read, "Get rid of them before it's too late." Greg crumpled the note in his hand, his face pale. He didn't tell Sarah or Emily, not wanting to scare them, but the message left him shaken. He had always thought of their town as a safe, welcoming place, but the note made him realize that fear and ignorance could bring out the worst in people. Inside, Emily was oblivious to the growing tensions. She was too busy caring for the babies, who were now beginning to crawl and babble. Their laughter filled the house, bringing a sense of joy that outweighed the challenges. Emily loved watching them explore their surroundings, their tiny hands reaching for toys and their eyes lighting up with wonder. One day, while playing with Grace, Emily noticed something strange. The baby was staring intently at the window, her tiny fingers reaching out as if trying to grasp something unseen. Emily followed her gaze and saw a faint shimmer of light outside, like the glow of the babies but more diffuse. "Mom. Dad." Emily called, her voice filled with excitement. "Come here. Look at this." Sarah and Greg rushed into the room, their expressions alarmed. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Emily pointed to the window. "Do you see that light?" Greg squinted, his brow furrowing. "I don't see anything. But it's right there," Emily insisted. "It looks like the glow from the babies, but it's outside." Sarah exchanged a worried glance with Greg. "Maybe you're just tired, sweetheart," she said gently. "You've been working so hard." Emily shook her head, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I'm not making it up." Grace saw it too. Her parents didn't argue, but Emily could tell they didn't believe her. She felt a pang of disappointment but decided to keep watching for the light. Deep down, she knew it was important even if no one else could see it. That night, as the babies slept, Emily sat by the window, staring out into the darkness. The light hadn't reappeared, but she felt certain it would. Something was happening, something she couldn't explain but felt deeply in her heart. As the days passed, Emily began to notice more strange occurrences. The light outside appeared sporadically, always faint but unmistakable. The baby's glow also grew stronger, filling the room with a warm, comforting energy. Emily started to wonder if the two phenomena were connected, and if they were, what it could mean. Despite the growing mystery, Emily remained focused on caring for the babies. She spent her days playing with them, singing to them and reading them stories. She had never been happier, even though she knew their presence was temporary. The thought of losing them filled her with a deep sadness, but she pushed it aside, determined to cherish every moment. One evening, as Emily was putting the babies to bed, she heard a knock at the door. Her parents answered, and moments later, a stranger stepped into the house. He was tall and thin, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "My name is Elias," the man said, his voice calm and steady. "I've come to help you understand the truth about the children." The McAllister family froze at the sight of Elias. He stood in their doorway, calm and composed, as though he'd been expecting this moment as much as they had been dreading it. Emily, holding Hope in her arms, felt an odd combination of fear and curiosity. There was something unsettlingly familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. Greg stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "Who are you and how do you know about the babies?" His voice was firm, though a note of unease crept in at the edges. Elias offered a small smile, the faint glow of his eyes catching the dim light. "I know you're scared. I would be too if I were in your position. But I promise I mean no harm. I'm here because the children are special. And I suspect you've already realized that." Sarah placed a hand on Greg's arm, a silent signal for him to stand down. She studied Elias carefully. "Special how? Do you know where they came from?" Elias nodded. "Yes, I do. But it's a long story and it might be easier if I explain it to all of you together. May I come in?" Greg hesitated, glancing at Sarah, who gave a small nod. "Fine," Greg said, stepping aside. "But if this is some kind of trick..." "It's not," Elias interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. I only want to help. Elias entered the living room, his presence commanding but not overbearing. He gestured to the couch. Please sit. This involves all of you, but most importantly, he looked directly at Emily. It involves her. Emily's heart raced as she clutched Hope tighter. Me? Why me? Because, Elias said softly, you're the reason they're here. The room fell silent. Emily blinked, confused. I don't understand. I didn't do anything. I just woke up and they were there. Elias nodded, taking a seat in the armchair across from her. You didn't do anything intentionally. But these children were drawn to you, Emily. They're connected to you in ways that even they don't fully understand. Greg, still skeptical, crossed his arms. This is ridiculous. Are you telling me 20 babies just appeared out of thin air because of my daughter? How is that possible? Elias turned to Greg, his gaze steady. Because these aren't ordinary children. They weren't born in the way you and I were. They were created. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Created? What does that mean? They were brought into existence for a purpose, Elias explained. Each child represents something unique, a piece of light, a fragment of hope. They are beings of pure energy, and their presence here is no accident. Emily stared at him, trying to process his words. But why me? Why did they come to me? Because you have something most people don't, Elias said, his voice filled with reverence. You have a heart that sees the world not as it is, but as it could be. You're innocent yet wise. Compassionate yet strong. The children felt that, and they chose you as their guardian. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at Hope, who was gazing up at her with wide, trusting eyes. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, she admitted. I'm just a kid. That's exactly why you're strong enough, Elias said with a kind smile. You don't see limits the way adults do. You believe in the impossible, and that belief is what the children need. Greg shook his head, still struggling to accept what he was hearing. If what you're saying is true, then why are they here? What do they want? They don't want anything, Elias said. But they have a purpose. The world is at a tipping point, filled with darkness and division. These children were sent to bring light, to remind humanity of what it's capable of. But their journey is just beginning, and it won't be easy. What do you mean, their journey? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Are they in danger? Yes, Elias admitted. Their presence hasn't gone unnoticed. There are forces that would seek to exploit them, to twist their light into something dark. That's why it's crucial they remain here, protected, until the time is right. Emily felt a surge of protectiveness rise within her. I'll keep them safe, she said firmly. I don't care what it takes. Elias looked at her, his expression filled with admiration. I have no doubt you will, Emily. But you won't have to do it alone. Your family will help you, as will I. Greg frowned. And how do we know we can trust you? You just showed up out of nowhere. You don't, Elias said simply. But I think you'll find that my actions will speak louder than my words. As if on cue, a soft glow began to emanate from Elias, similar to the baby's light but brighter and more controlled. The room filled with warmth, a sense of peace washing over everyone. Even Greg, despite his skepticism, felt his tension ease. What are you? Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe. I'm a guardian, Elias said. My role is to guide and protect, just as yours is now. But make no mistake, the true strength lies with Emily. She is their beacon. Emily looked down at the babies, tears streaming down her face. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Elias moved into the guest room, offering his assistance as the family adjusted to their new reality. He helped Emily refine her routine, teaching her ways to comfort the babies and strengthen their bond. Under his guidance, Emily began to notice subtle changes in herself. She felt more confident, more attuned to the baby's needs. It was as if she could sense their emotions before they even cried. But it wasn't long before the outside world intruded once again. News of the glowing babies had spread far beyond their small town, drawing the attention of scientists, journalists, and even government officials. One morning, a black SUV pulled up in front of their house, and two men in suits stepped out. Greg answered the door, his face tense. Can I help you? We're with the Department of National Security, one of the men said, flashing a badge. We've received reports of unusual activity at this residence. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Greg's heart sank. We're not interested in speaking with you, he said, starting to close the door. The agent stopped him with a firm hand. Mr. McAllister, we strongly advise you cooperate. This is a matter of national security. Emily, watching from the living room, felt a surge of panic. She turned to Elias, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. "What do we do?" she whispered. Elias stood, his expression calm but serious. "Trust me." He walked to the door, placing a hand on Greg's shoulder. "Gentlemen," Elias said, his voice smooth and commanding. "There's nothing for you here." The agents looked at him, their expressions briefly flickering with confusion. For a moment, it seemed as though they might push back, but then their faces softened and they nodded. "Apologies for the disturbance," one of them said. "Have a good day." As they drove away, Greg turned to Elias, his eyes wide. "What just happened?" "I persuaded them to leave," Elias said simply. "But they'll be back. We don't have much time." Over the next few days, the sense of urgency in the McAllister household grew. The babies, still glowing faintly, seemed more restless than before, as though they could sense the looming danger. Emily stayed close to them, her protective instincts stronger than ever. She wasn't just their caretaker anymore, she was their guardian. Elias worked tirelessly to prepare the family for what was coming. He explained that the forces seeking the babies weren't just humans driven by curiosity or greed. There were darker entities, ancient and unseen, who thrived on chaos and division. These entities viewed the baby's light as a threat, a force capable of undoing their influence. "They'll come," Elias said one evening as the family gathered around the kitchen table. "And when they do, we need to be ready." Greg leaned back in his chair, his face pale. "How do we fight something we can't even see?" "With love," Elias replied. "With unity. The darkness feeds on fear and doubt. But the light? It grows stronger when we stand together." Emily listened intently, her small hands clutching the edge of the table. "I won't let them take the babies," she said firmly. "I'll protect them." Elias gave her a proud smile. "I know you will. You've already proven that you're stronger than most adults I've met." But despite Elias's confidence, the family couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. The strange appearance of the government agents had shaken them, and they knew it was only a matter of time before others came knocking. The town's curiosity had turned into suspicion, and whispers of fear and mistrust had begun to spread. One morning, as Emily was feeding Grace, she heard a commotion outside. She peered through the window and saw a group of townspeople gathered on the lawn, their faces tense and uncertain. Some held signs that read things like, "Tell the truth," and "What are you hiding?" "Mom. Dad." Emily called, panic rising in her chest. Sarah and Greg rushed to the window, their expressions darkening as they took in the scene. "This is getting out of hand," Greg muttered. Elias stepped into the room, his presence immediately calming. "I'll handle this," he said. He walked outside, his movements deliberate and steady. The crowd quieted as he approached, their eyes fixed on him. "What do you want?" Elias asked, his voice calm but firm. A man at the front of the group stepped forward. It was Mr. Higgins, one of their neighbors. "We just want answers," he said. "Everyone's talking about the glowing babies and the strange visitors. It's not normal and people are scared." Elias nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it. The unknown is frightening. But I assure you the children are not a threat. They're here for a reason, one that none of us fully understand yet. All I ask is that you give this family the space and time to figure it out." The crowd murmured, some looking uncertain while others nodded in agreement. Mr. Higgins hesitated before speaking again. "And if we don't? What then?" Elias's eyes glowed faintly, and his voice took on a commanding tone. "Then you'll have to answer to forces far greater than any of us." The crowd fell silent, and after a moment they began to disperse. Emily watched from the window, her admiration for Elias growing. He had a way of making people listen, of diffusing tension without escalating conflict. She only hoped it would be enough. But the reprieve was short-lived. That night, as the family sat together in the living room, a strange energy filled the air. The babies, who had been sleeping peacefully, suddenly began to cry in unison. Their glow flickered, dimming and brightening erratically. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Elias stood, his expression grave. "They're here." The lights in the house flickered and a low, ominous hum filled the air. Emily clutched hope tightly, her heart pounding. "Who's here?" she whispered. "Those who seek to extinguish the light," Elias replied. "Stay close to the children. They're safest with you." Greg and Sarah exchanged frightened glances but did as Elias instructed, gathering the babies and huddling together in the center of the room. Emily knelt beside them, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. The air grew colder and shadows began to creep along the walls, moving in unnatural ways. Emily could feel the darkness pressing in, suffocating and relentless. But she refused to give in to fear. Elias stepped forward, his glow intensifying until it filled the room with warmth and light. "You will not have them," he said, his voice echoing with power. "They are protected." The shadows writhed, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they surged toward the family, their movements quick and erratic. Emily closed her eyes, holding Hope close and whispering softly. "It's okay," she said. "We'll be okay." And then something extraordinary happened. The baby's glow, which had been flickering weakly, suddenly flared to life. The light wasn't soft and golden anymore. It was brilliant and blinding, filling every corner of the room and pushing back the darkness. Emily opened her eyes, startled by the intensity of the light. She could feel its warmth, its power, and she realized it wasn't just coming from the babies. It was coming from her too. "Emily," Elias said, his voice filled with awe. "You're the key." Emily didn't fully understand what he meant, but she didn't have time to ask. The shadows were retreating, their forms dissolving into nothingness under the force of the light. The room grew warmer, brighter, until finally the darkness was gone. Silence fell, broken only by the soft coos of the babies. Emily looked around, her heart racing. "Is it over?" she asked. Elias nodded, his glow fading slightly. "For now. But they'll be back. They always are." Greg slumped into a chair, his face pale. "How do we fight something like that? How do we keep them safe?" "With her," Elias said, nodding toward Emily. "She's stronger than you realize." Emily looked at him, determination shining in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes." Elias smiled. "I know you will." The days following the attack felt like a blur to Emily. The house, which had once been a sanctuary of warmth and light, now felt heavy with the weight of what had happened. Her parents did their best to return to some sense of normalcy, but Emily knew things would never be the same. The babies, though, seemed unaffected. They continued to glow softly, their laughter and babbles bringing a sense of peace that Emily clung to. Every time she held them, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. They depended on her, and no matter how scared she was, she wouldn't let them down. Elias spent most of his time teaching Emily how to strengthen her connection to the babies. He explained that their light wasn't just a physical phenomenon, it was tied to emotions, to the bonds they shared with one another. "The stronger your connection," Elias said, "the brighter their light will shine. And that light is their greatest protection." Emily took his lessons seriously. She spent hours with the babies, learning their needs, their moods, their quirks. She discovered that singing to them made their light grow brighter, and that holding them close when they cried helped them calm down faster. Each moment she spent with them deepened her bond, and with it, her confidence. But the threat of another attack loomed over her like a storm cloud. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made her heart race. She knew the darkness wasn't gone for good, it was just waiting for the right moment to strike again. One evening, as Emily sat on the floor playing with Hope and Grace, Elias entered the room, his expression unusually somber. "Emily," he said, "there's something you need to know." Emily looked up, her stomach nodding at the tone of his voice. "What is it?" Elias sat down beside her, his glow dimmer than usual. "The darkness won't stop coming. It's relentless. And while you've done an incredible job protecting the babies, they can't stay here forever." Emily's heart sank. "What do you mean? Where would they go?" "They're not meant to stay in this world," Elias explained gently. "Their light is too powerful, too pure. It doesn't belong here. They need to return to where they came from." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "But I love them. I can't let them go." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know, Emily, and they love you too. But keeping them here puts them in constant danger. The longer they stay, the more the darkness will come for them, and for you." Emily wiped her eyes, trying to process what he was saying. "How do they go back? And how do I know they'll be safe?" Elias hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "There's a portal," he said finally. "A gateway to the dimension they came from. It's a place of light, of peace. But opening the portal requires an immense amount of energy that can only come from you." "Me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "How?" "Your bond with the babies is what brought them here," Elias said. "And it's what will send them back. You'll need to channel your love for them, your connection, into the portal. It's not easy, but I believe you can do it." Emily looked down at Hope, who was staring up at her with wide, trusting eyes. The thought of saying goodbye to her, to any of them, was unbearable. But deep down, Emily knew Elias was right. She couldn't keep them here no matter how much she wanted to. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. When do we start?" Elias gave her a small, sad smile. soon. But first you need to prepare yourself. Saying goodbye won't be easy. The days that followed were some of the hardest of Emily's life. She tried to savor every moment with the babies, their laughter, their tiny hands reaching for her, the way they glowed brighter whenever she sang to them. She told them stories, sang them lullabies, and held them close, memorizing every detail of their little faces. Her parents, too, struggled with the impending farewell. Sarah spent hours rocking the babies, tears streaming down her face. Greg, though stoic on the outside, often disappeared into the garage, returning with red-rimmed eyes. The babies had become a part of their family, and the thought of losing them was almost too much to bear. Finally, the day arrived. Elias led the family to a clearing in the woods behind their house, where the portal would be opened. The air was crisp and cool, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the ground. Emily carried Hope in her arms, with Sarah and Greg holding Grace and Max. The other babies were bundled into a makeshift carrier that Elias had fashioned. They glowed faintly, their light flickering as if sensing the significance of the moment. Elias stood in the center of the clearing, his glow brighter than ever. "Emily," he said, "are you ready?" Emily nodded, though her hands trembled. "What do I do?" "Stand here," Elias instructed, motioning to a spot in front of him. "Close your eyes and focus on the love you feel for them. Let it fill you, let it guide you. The portal will respond to your energy." Emily took a deep breath, then stepped into the circle. She closed her eyes, cradling Hope against her chest. She thought of the first time she had held the babies, the overwhelming sense of responsibility and love that had filled her. She thought of their laughter, their glow, the way they had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. As she focused, she felt a warmth spreading through her, starting in her chest and radiating outward. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, and when she opened her eyes, she saw the faint outline of the portal beginning to form, a shimmering oval of light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. "It's working," Elias said, his voice filled with awe. "Keep going, Emily. You're doing it." Emily closed her eyes again, tears streaming down her face as she poured every ounce of love she had into the portal. The light grew stronger, brighter, until it illuminated the entire clearing. When she opened her eyes, the portal was fully formed, its surface shimmering like liquid gold. She turned to Elias, her heart aching. "Is this goodbye?" "For now," Elias said. "But the love you've given them will stay with them always. And it will stay with you too." Emily nodded, then stepped back as Sarah and Greg gently placed the babies near the portal. Each one turned to look at Emily, their eyes filled with wisdom far beyond their years. As they entered the portal, their glow intensified, until they were consumed by the light. And then they were gone. The portal faded, leaving the clearing quiet and still. Emily fell to her knees, sobbing, her heart feeling both full and empty at the same time. Sarah and Greg knelt beside her, wrapping her in their arms. "You did it, Emily," Elias said softly. "You gave them what they needed." Emily looked up at him, her tears glistening in the fading sunlight. "Will I ever see them again?" Elias hesitated, then smiled gently. "In ways you can't yet imagine." In the weeks following the baby's departure, the McAllister household felt strangely quiet. Emily often found herself waking up in the middle of the night, instinctively reaching out for one of the babies only to remember they were gone. The absence of their soft cries and glowing light left an emptiness that was hard to describe, a void that even her parents struggled to fill. At first, Emily found solace in the routine she'd built for herself during the months she cared for the babies. She continued singing lullabies at night, even though there was no one to hear them, and she spent hours staring out of her bedroom window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the faint, otherworldly light she had seen before. It never came. Her parents too were trying to adjust. Greg threw himself into work, taking on extra hours at the hardware store to distract himself. Sarah, on the other hand, spent more time at home, often sitting silently at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her eyes distant. The family spoke about the babies occasionally, but the conversations always ended in tears or quiet reflection. Elias stayed with them for a while, offering quiet support and guidance as they processed their grief. "It's natural to feel their absence so deeply," he told Emily one evening as they sat together on the porch. "They left a piece of themselves with you, and that's not something that fades overnight." "But it hurts," Emily said, her voice breaking. "I miss them so much." "I know," Elias replied gently. "But their light is still with you, Emily. It always will be. You'll feel it again when the time is right." Emily wasn't sure she believed him. The days stretched on, blending into one another, and the weight of her sadness grew heavier. She tried returning to her normal life, playing with Scout, climbing the oak tree in the backyard, But everything felt different now, like a piece of her had been left behind in the clearing. The town too had changed. Without the babies to focus on, the rumors and gossip slowly died down, and life began to return to normal. Some people, like Mrs. Higgins, still eyed the McAllisters with suspicion, but most of the community seemed to understand that the family had gone through something extraordinary and were simply trying to move forward. Then, one crisp autumn morning, something unexpected happened. Emily was walking through the woods behind her house, as she often did when she needed time to think. The leaves crunched under her feet, and the air was filled with the earthy scent of fallen foliage. She hadn't planned to visit the clearing, but her feet carried her there anyway. As she stepped into the open space, she felt a strange warmth wash over her, like the sun breaking through a cloudy sky. She looked around, her heart pounding, and that's when she saw it, a faint shimmer of golden light, just like the one she had seen before. It hovered near the center of the clearing, pulsing softly. "Elias," Emily called, her voice trembling. She didn't know if he was nearby, but she hoped he would hear her. Moments later, Elias appeared, walking calmly through the trees. "I felt it too," he said, his eyes locked on the shimmering light. "It seems their presence isn't entirely gone." Emily stepped closer to the light, her breath catching in her throat. "What does it mean?" Elias smiled, his expression filled with wonder. "It means their journey isn't over. And neither is yours." The light grew brighter as Emily approached, and she felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt since the babies had left. It wasn't just their light, it was their love, their connection reaching out to her from wherever they had gone. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she stood in the glow of the light. "Are they okay?" she whispered. "They're more than okay," Elias said. "They're thriving. And they want you to know they're grateful for everything you did for them." Emily closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the light wash over her. For the first time since the babies had left, she felt a sense of peace. They weren't gone, not really. They were still with her, just in a different way. The light lingered for a while before slowly fading, leaving the clearing bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. Emily turned to Elias, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "Will I ever see them again?" Elias hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps not in the way you're imagining. But their light is part of you now. Every time you share kindness, every time you bring joy to someone else, you'll feel them. They're in everything you do." Emily smiled, her tears drying on her cheeks. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone. From that day on, Emily began to heal. She returned to her routines, but this time with a renewed sense of purpose. She threw herself into helping others, inspired by the love and light the babies had brought into her life. She visited neighbors who were lonely, volunteered at the community center, and even started a small garden in the backyard, filling it with vibrant flowers that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Her parents noticed the change in her and followed her example. Sarah began baking for the community, delivering pies and cookies to families who needed a little extra cheer. Greg organized repair projects for elderly neighbors, fixing roofs and mending fences without asking for anything in return. The McAllister family, once overwhelmed by the weight of the unknown, had found a way to channel their love and grief into something beautiful. Elias, true to his word, stayed with them as long as they needed him. He continued to guide Emily, teaching her how to recognize the light in others and how to protect her own. "The world can be a dark place," he told her one evening as they sat by the garden. "But people like you remind us that the light is always there, even when it's hard to see." Years passed and Emily grew into a young woman. Though the babies were no longer physically with her, their presence shaped every aspect of her life. She became known in her community as a source of hope and kindness, someone who could bring light to even the darkest situations. And while she rarely spoke about the extraordinary events of her childhood, those who knew her best could sense that she carried something special within her. A quiet strength, a radiant warmth that seemed to brighten the world around her. On the anniversary of the day the babies had arrived, Emily returned to the clearing. The oak trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. She knelt in the center of the space, where the portal had once opened, and closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As she stood, she felt a faint warmth on her cheek, like a soft kiss from the wind. She smiled, knowing it was their way of saying they hadn't forgotten her, and that they never would.